Greetings, everyone. This is Sister Bashea, and thank you for coming in onto the Tribal Nations United Community Engagement Call. I thank everyone.
I first met Dan in New York after he became a social worker, and very quickly he offered to volunteer in various capacities for different organizations that we were involved in at the time, cult-related. And I immediately liked him. He was so generous with his time and very easy to work with. But I wasn't aware of the, and I will say this word, brilliance of his mind, until he presented traumatic abuse in cults at an ICSA conference. I believe it was in about 2002 or so. And his presentation allowed me to look at the relationship between the cult leader and the members in a totally new way that instantly made so much sense to me. And you'll hear more about that today. Then he published traumatic abuse in cult, with cult members and in a memoir journal, and other people were able to see what an important concept this was. So let me tell you about Dan. He is the author of Traumatic Narcissism, Relational Systems of Subjugation, published by Routledge. His affiliations include psychoanalyst, private practice, New York City, and NIAC, New York. Faculty and clinical supervisor at the National Institute for Psychotherapies, New York. Clinical supervisor and faculty, Westchester Center for the Study of Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy, New York. Adjunct clinical supervisor in Smith College of Social Work, Massachusetts, former co-chair. Continuing Education Committee, the International Association for Relational Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy. Dan spent 13 years as a staff member in City Yoga Foundation. Then he wore many hats, including manager of the residential Manhattan facilities, educator, spokesman, public relations, coordinator, community organizer, and writer-director of public programs. Dan exited City Yoga in 1994, published an open letter about City Yoga on the internet in 1995, and helped create the leading City Yoga website, one of the first internet websites for ex-cult members. Shaw is the author of Traumatic Abuse in Cults, a psychoanalytic perspective published in Cultic Studies Journal, numerous psychoanalytic papers, and the editor of a special issue on traumatizing narcissists in ICSA, International Journal of Cultic Studies. Mr. Shaw leads the monthly support area ICSA group with Chris Carlson, and I must say they are doing a wonderful job in New York. This group offers support, education, and interaction for all those who've been harmed by or want to learn about high-demand groups. Another thing I want to just mention about Dan. When he speaks, he talks about his own personal cult experience. And I think that is very important as a clinician, that he is going to his area of shame and putting it out there, his struggles. And I feel like it humanizes him in all of our eyes. And it is my pleasure to present to you.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning. Thanks. It's wonderful to be here, and so nice to have you introduce me. Thank you. I'm loving being here in Santa Fe. I was here with my cult. There's so many places with City Yoga. Okay, is this audible in a good way? You can,
yes.
Not too bad, not too bad. Okay. So yesterday I gave a talk, and I gave some of the part of my cult biography, which those of you who were there yesterday are going to have to bear with me. You're going to hear some of it again. Actually, this while I'm repeating this part, you can take your phone out and text or look at your computer. Joking. Okay. So, oh yeah, maybe turn off those phones, speaking of that. All right, so when I began social work school in September 1994, it had been just 2 years since I moved out of the City Yoga ashram I'd lived and worked in for more than 10 years. I had entered as a full-time worker there at the age of 28, and right up until the summer of 94, when I was 42 years old and married and living outside of the ashram for about 2 years at that point, I still considered myself a devotee. In those 2 years since I moved out of the ashram, I'd done a good deal of soul searching, and I figured that my life experience had been good preparation for a career as a psychotherapist. Nevertheless, I was taken aback when I began my field placement at a community mental health center. Many of the people I was seeing there were very traumatized people that had terrible histories of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. Some of them were still involved in ongoing abuse, some of them were even still perpetrating abuse. And some were very addicted or recovering from addictions. And although my life had been really a bed of roses compared to theirs, I actually began to discover some connections that I hadn't realized. Now, I had always portrayed my participation in City Yoga as an idealistic commitment to a noble spiritual path. Dedicated to spiritual awakening and upliftment in the world. But just after school began, this identification was shattered when I learned of an incident involving a friend of mine, a young woman, just turned 21, who had been sexually harassed in the ashram by one of its most powerful leaders. And when she sought help from Guru Mai, a female Indian guru who was the head of the ashram, Guru Mai told this young woman that she had brought the harassment on herself, and Guru Mai said that you were not to tell anyone about this, especially not your mother. Now, the woman's mother was the leader of one of the leaders of the Boston City Yoga community, a long-time follower. And this woman, the young woman, my friend, after 2 years of very intense inner conflict, finally did tell her story. And as a result, many others began to speak out, eventually contributing to an article written by one of the staff writers of the New Yorker magazine, which came out in 1994. So this was published in the New Yorker magazine expose just 2 months after I started graduate school for my MSW. And it revealed a Pandora's box of well-documented, very fact-checked, and well-researched abuses by the leaders of City Yoga that had been going on for more than 20 years. So in the 2 years before the publication of that article, when I wasn't living in the ashram, I'd slowly and painfully begun to acknowledge to myself and others that there were aspects of City Yoga and its leaders that I found disturbing. In particular, I'd witnessed and personally experienced Guru Mai verbally and emotionally abusing devotees. I knew that she and Bhaktivinoda before had used spies, hidden microphones, and cameras to gather information which they would use against people, often publicly shaming and humiliating them. And there was a lot more that I had seen and heard, and that was all being kept in very soft focus, blurred, and pushed way back into a dark space in my mind that I kept at a great distance, behind a closed door with a big "Do Not Disturb" sign on it. In other words, I was massively dissociated, which I still practice today. And my dissociated doubts about Sid crystallized when I heard the story of this young woman I knew. And in that phrase, "Don't ever tell anyone about this, especially not your mother," I recognized the echo of the voice of the incestuous father, the battering husband, the sexual harasser, the rapist. And as Judith Herman says in Trauma and Recovery, secrecy and silence are the perpetrator's first line of defense. And I was hearing those words, "Don't ever tell," that broke for me what Ernst Becker has called the spell cast by persons, the nexus of unfreedom. So even though I experienced this as a snapping moment, I snapped out of it. In fact, I'd been slowly leaving City Yoga for about the last 5 years. I just didn't want to know it. But when I wasn't putting on my happy public face, I was lonely, depressed, empty. And I kept sweeping all that under the rug. And it didn't matter that the rug was moving closer and closer to the ceiling. I would just find another room and start sweeping again. And leaving just was simply not an option. Until I finally ran out of rugs and rooms. And, I was a questioner. And my ex-guru got sick of me trying to have my own mind. So when she told me to go out and get a job and see a psychologist, I begged her to let me stay. And I was lucky that she didn't let me. And I was also lucky that I did not see one of her psychologists, the one that reported to her so that she could manipulate the therapies. And I was lucky that I had taught myself to type and use computers while living in the ashram. So, I heard this story from my friend, and I read the New Yorker magazine article when it came out, and about a dozen people I knew in the New York area, and hundreds of others I didn't know, left City Yoga at that time. Liz Harris, the author who now teaches writing at Columbia University, became a conduit for everybody who wanted to talk about it. And she put all of us together, and she, in fact, came down to the village and had dinner with all of us. And so we all got to talk, and all of us for the next 6 years online were telling every dissociated story and memory, and we told every secret. All there online, in public, and it's still online. It's at the website that I still maintain. It's called leavingcityyoga.net, and that, as Lowney mentioned, was one of the first ex-cult member websites. And now there are many others that are modeled after this one, I'm proud to say. I didn't create it. It was created by another fellow who had grown up in City Yoga, and when he got burned out, he made the mistake of trying to make it an interactive website. So all the trolls went after him, and he just got burned out. So he asked if I would take it over, and I did, but I immediately stopped letting it be interactive. So as a result, it's been up now for 20 years. It's a repository of information and resources. I add things to it, or sometimes people ask me to take something off, but that's it, no interaction. I spare myself that craziness. So, by the way, this is my first PowerPoint, so please be kind. And I didn't even ask my kids to help me. Okay, so because I've been completely enthralled by the leader, and had accepted the leader's claims to perfection and enlightenment, I'd chosen to virtually enslave myself to the guru and her agenda. And in order to ensure that I could hold my position in the group, I blinded myself to the abuse, the corruption, the lies, the hypocrisy, that I came to recognize as her modus operandi. And not only had I blinded myself to these things, but I've been incorporating them into my own personality. I left City Yoga in '94, and in '96 I wrote the essay that I mentioned, Traumatic Abuse and Cults, which is, I guess, on the IGSA website. And up to this point, I was studying psychoanalytic theory on my own. I formally entered psychoanalytic training in '96. That was another 4 years. During this time, I got married and had my first child. And I've been in private practice as a psychoanalytic psychotherapist since 2000. I should say that my work as a therapist with people who've left cults is just a small part of my practice and always has been. It's really a very general psychoanalytic practice. But I have not stopped thinking about my own cultic experience after all these years. And in the work that I do, I found striking parallels to the cult experience in the lives of people I've worked with who have been in highly controlling relationships, whether with parents, siblings, spouses, bosses, teachers, and not infrequently with previous therapists. So with the encouragement of one of my psychoanalytic teachers, I began writing in 2011, 17 years after leaving City Yoga, what became my first and for now only book, Dramatic Narcissism, Relational Systems of Subjugation. Oops, there it is. And it's a book that's primarily geared toward mental health clinicians, but it's apparently readable by people who are not in the field, because I get a lot of messages from people who read it who tell me that it means a lot to them. And it covers a lot of ground that's not directly about cults, but in fact the book is all about what goes on in the relationship between a cultic leader and a cult follower, whether the venue is a cult or a family, a marriage, a school, an office, the internet, any relationship. And oh, look, there's a message.
We're magical, Dan.
And there's another message. Wow. Now, what is subjugation? Well, if you're subjugating me, it means that you're treating me as less than human. Because you're requiring me to accept that you're superior to me and that you're entitled to rule over me. You're telling me that I have no intrinsic value of my own, that my value is actually only determined by you, and is based on what use you're able to make of me. For centuries, as far back as history is known, really, whole races of people have subjugated whole other races of people. And I think it's possible to speculate that all of us have the subjugator and the subjugated somewhere in our DNA. So this is not the kind of uplifting good news you may have wanted to hear this morning, but you can get that in other places such as this one, or if that's not your persuasion, you can try mine, and get that kind of uplifting stuff there. But I bring this up, the universality of the potential to be a subjugator or be subjugated, because we're all familiar with the question, what kind of person gets into a cult? And we all know the answer, well, anybody gets into a cult, we all know that. Anyone can be vulnerable, and it's true. And I've often explained it this way, it's the answer. Vulnerability plus bad luck to be exposed equals getting recruited into that internet photo has a label called Creepy Tom. But it goes further than that. And here I'm getting a little Freudian. The capacity to be sadistic and the capacity to be masochistic, to dominate or to submit, to control or be controlled, to subjugate or be the subjugated. These are universal human characteristics that are potentials in all of us, that under certain conditions can be activated. We don't have to look any further than the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon to recognize this. And of course, the Milgram experiments are very famous to all of us, many of us at least who have been to these programs over the years. They never fail to be mentioned because they demonstrate the extent of cruelty a person is capable of going to under certain conditions. So today, I'm going to discuss the psychology of the cult leader as I formulated that psychology based on my up-close and personal experiences with the cult leader that I followed. But I also based my formulations on many years of working with adult children of extremely narcissistic parents, on working with partners of narcissistic spouses, on working with former patients of narcissistic therapists, on speaking with friends who were dominated and controlled by a narcissistic sibling, and on close relationships with people I know personally whose families were dominated and controlled by an abusive narcissistic parent. Now, I find it impossible to discuss the cult leader without also discussing the follower, because as I see it, together they form a relational system. And the way I see it, what drives this system is the leader's need of the follower. I want to say that again, the leader's need of the follower. In fact, what I want to show is that the leader's need of the follower is often more desperate and more a matter of life and death than is the follower's need of the leader. Although that's not always how it looks to the outsider, and not how it feels to the follower. Alright, so let's get into it. The cult leader is what I call a traumatizing narcissist. Narcissism today is a public word in common parlance, and when most people talk about narcissism, They're referring to self-centered, vain, exhibitionistic people, people who seek admiration and who make everything about themselves. And there's an amazing amount of popular psychology about narcissism. It's all over the internet. And there's just an absolute ton of it, how to divorce one, how to get one out of your life, how to deal with one who's a boss, and so on. But the psychoanalytic definition of pathological narcissism is a little more complicated. It's too complicated. In fact, it's so complicated, I'm going to pause, and monitors are going to hand out 2 Excedrin and an Adderall. And since we're in Santa Fe, a shot of tequila. How about that? Is it too early? No. Actually, let's just continue with that. I'll try not to make this too mind-numbing. In psychoanalytic theory, narcissism basically refers to self-love or self-esteem. So your narcissism could be way too inflated, and that can be kind of cool. In one case like this, you know, very inflated narcissism, that's kind of fun, right? Or not so cool. Right? Not so cool. Did you see the movie The Interview with Seth Rogen? And, you know, it clearly showed that Kim Jong-un, or Dear Leader, as he likes to be called, you know, is hiding his terrible fear of unmanliness and his insecurity underneath all of this bravado and so on. And that is typical of what we would call the pathological narcissist. Or you can be a more self-deprecating, self-effacing kind of person, but secretly be very full of yourself and secretly feeling very resentful that you're not getting what you deserve. And in that case, you have this kind of false humility. And that also qualifies you as a pathological narcissist. So in David Copperfield, there's Uriah Heep, you remember that character? Or in the movie All About Eve, there's Eve Harrington. She's so fawning and humble, and in fact, she's ready to knife him in the back, and then she gets a chance. So grandiosity, as with Muhammad Ali, can be fun. There's also Mae West. She was good at having fun with grandiosity. At the premiere of Walt Disney's Snow White, the reporter asked her how she liked the movie, and she said, "Well, I used to be Snow White, but I drifted." You know, and this kind of self-effacing, self-deprecating humor can also be played with as well. There are a lot of great comedians these days, like Louis C.K., Amy Schumer. They do this brilliantly. They play it exaggerating the lower end of the self-esteem pole on the narcissistic spectrum. And now some try to play with both sides of it, and they don't quite get away with it. And they're a little bit hard to categorize, right? But when you're a pathological narcissist, you're not playing like Muhammad Ali or like Louis C.K. You're not playing with these, you know, grandiosity or self-deprecation. It's not a joke. They have a grandiose sense of self-importance, and they can be preoccupied with fantasies of power and success, ideal love, but they're also troubled by a sense of inadequacy, and they respond to criticism with shame and rage. They can both over-idealize and devalue others. They expect special favors, and they also attempt to exploit others. Most of all, they lack empathy, so just go down those points. Grandiose sense of self-importance, preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, troubled by a sense of inadequacy. Respond to criticism, defeat, or rejection, either by indifference or by feelings of rage, shame, humiliation, or emptiness. Their relationships with others are disturbed by expectations of special favors, exploitativeness, over-idealization and devaluation of others, and lack of empathy. Okay, so that's the pathological narcissist, as defined in psychoanalytic terms, and also in non-psychoanalytic psychology. It's not just a psychoanalytic one. Now, I'm talking about something else, not the pathological narcissist. I'm talking about traumatizing narcissists, because I'm making it a little different, and I want to describe a relationship, not just a particular kind of person, and I want to talk about what happens in that relationship. And what I'm saying is that in a cult, a leader who's a narcissist traumatizes her followers. And what is the trauma? The trauma is the trauma of subjugation. So remember, if you're subjugating me, it means that you're treating me as less than human. You're requiring me to accept that you're superior to me and entitled to rule over me. You're telling me I have no intrinsic value, that my value is determined only by you, based on what use you're able to make of me. And what happens to the person who is traumatized in this way? As I see it, this person loses the ability to know who they are. The cult member is partially giving up their identity, but in a great many ways, the traumatizing narcissist is an identity thief. The traumatizing narcissist cult leader wants to seduce and control the recruit, but doesn't want to appear to be the one who wants. The recruit has to be the one that's wanting and needing and supplicating. And yet becoming a follower means orienting yourself to being who, how, and what the leader wants, what the leader likes and doesn't like, what will keep you in, and what will keep you from being thrown out. So this means that what you want, and how, and who you are, is now all about what the leader requires. So I'm no longer motivated by my own desires or my own inner potentials. I'm motivated to meet the leader's requirements for allowing me to remain in the group. I've allowed myself to become the object of the leader. I've objectified myself. I've allowed my subjectivity, my sense of myself as a subject, to be hijacked. So an example of this that comes to mind involves a woman I'll call Irene, who was on staff in the City Yoga ashram, and I was very friendly with her. She was an actress. I had been an actor myself before I entered City Yoga. And though she mainly earned her, she had mainly been earning a living as a nurse. But she had a riotous sense of humor, and she had this great mop of curly red hair, and if you happened to catch her in the right mood, she could do what amounted to a stand-up comedy routine that would leave you rolling on the floor in stitches. And I hadn't seen her for a while. I was on tour with her, and when I came back, I ran into Irene in the hallway, and I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was short and gray, no curls. And I said, "Hi, what happened?" And she smiled wanly. She said, "Guru Maharaj said I was hiding behind my hair, and she told me to shave my head, and this is how I grew back." Wow, I said, not knowing what to say. "How you doing?" I asked. Irene said, "I miss her so much. I'm just heart sore." And with that smile. And I said, "Oh, wow, okay, well, we gotta run and see her." And it was for Irene to drain the life out of herself and become such a perfect devotee that all she did was pine away for the Guru if she wasn't in the Guru's presence. Irene had completely objectified herself. She had emptied herself of everything she was and filled herself with nothing but the Guru. Another woman in the ashram was an extremely successful yoga teacher in Hawaii, and when she came to live in the ashram, she taught yoga at first, and she was a sensation. Everybody thought she was just brilliant. But Guru Maharaj soon found out about it and told the woman that she was full of pride and ego, and that she needed to stop teaching yoga, and she should work as a security guard in the ashram. "Yes, Guru Maharaj, I will do thy bidding, Guru Maharaj." And so this middle-aged rock star yoga teacher just gave it all up to become a security guard at these old run-down hotels converted into this shabby ashram in the most depressed part of upstate New York. And then there's my own story. Between 85 and 92, I worked full-time for Guru Maharaj. Much of my time was spent touring the USA with a group of other staff members. We visited all the small centers and larger city centers where we reported on the status, we critiqued, presented programs, tried to inspire greater fervor and more donations. And I did well, and I went on to be put in charge of advance work for Guru Maharaj's tour in Japan, which went very well. So at that point, I was where I thought I wanted to be, close to the Guru. I was getting bigger job titles, more work, more meetings with the Guru, more attention. And it got to the point where I was asked to come talk to Guru Maharaj every day and present my business issues to her, this whole darshan, have other people around, and she would be calling the Guru is elevating you, or you think the leader is elevating you. What's happening is that they're actually sucking the life out of you. So by making others feel ashamed of their vitality, like making the redhead shave her head, making them feel ashamed of their talent and their intelligence, by calling it ego and pride and vanity and whatever other words I come up with, cult leaders manage their envy, and they ward off their shame by objectifying and undermining and diminishing their followers. And this is what the traumatizing narcissist does. They maintain their own superiority by devitalizing and diminishing another, and keeping that other under their control. They deflect their own shame about having any needs by pretending not to have any needs, but making somebody else have all the needs and keeping that person under their control. Crushing followers, frustrating the expression of their natural abilities on a regular basis. It's a good warning to the other followers not to get too full of themselves. It establishes the dominance of the leader in the alpha role, and it helps the leader stay as dissociated as possible from any self-doubt, any fear, any sense of inadequacy. In fact, I believe that defeating and thereby controlling followers is what keeps cult leaders from going insane altogether. Although that can only work for so long, as we know all too well from Jim Jones, David Koresh, Shoko Asahara, and many others. So I'm going to explain how I believe a person becomes a traumatizing narcissist. And then, let's see what time is left. Okay, so I'm going to explain how I believe a person becomes a traumatizing narcissist, and then I'm going to explain in greater detail what I believe it is they're doing in relation to others and why. So there's 4 headings I'm using to think about this. The first one, intergenerational trauma. All right, I'll put the text up after I talk. Intergenerational trauma. Narcissists grow up in families with narcissistic parents. And the person who grows up to become a traumatizing narcissist has typically been exposed to traumatizing behavior from their parents throughout their developmental years in the form of chronic shaming. The traumatizing narcissist parent envies and resents the child's right to dependency and demands covertly or overtly that the child recognize the exclusive validity of the parent's needs and wishes. Which means, of course, that the child is to be ashamed of her own needs and desires and view them as the parent does, as contemptible. So, imagine a child, totally dependent, being made to feel ashamed for being dependent. But why would the parent do that? Because the parent wants to be the one whose needs matters and resents and envies the child's claim to dependency. Now this is a traumatizing situation with a narcissistic parent, and that child is put in an impossible situation. The parent assumes the posture of viewing dependency in others as contemptible and delusionally imagines himself to be a superior person because he's transcended dependency. Now, if a traumatized child like this has been successfully indoctrinated to view dependency as shameful and contemptible, he can, as an adult, disavow his own dependency and become very defended against it and become a traumatizing narcissist. And it can be intergenerationally transmitted. That trauma is now going from one generation to the next. I hope that makes sense. The next, okay, so there's the text on that. The traumatizing narcissist raised by narcissistic parents. The parents resent the child's dependence. The child is shamed for being needy. The parents preach contempt for neediness, but in reality only their needs matter. If the child's defense against the parent is to manically deny dependency, that child can become a traumatizing narcissist. Okay. The next point is delusional infallibility and entitlement. So now we have an adult traumatizing narcissist. And he's obsessed with maintaining a rigid sense of omnipotent superiority and perfection. Think about your cult leader. I'm omnipotent, I'm superior, I'm perfect. That's an obsession. You have to really hold on tightly to and believe in, and defend constantly. And that perfection involves infallibility, total self-sufficiency, and total entitlement. He's got to keep shame away, the shame he was made to feel about being needy throughout his development. Shame is kryptonite to the narcissist. So he defends his conviction of righteousness and justification vigilantly. One of the things he learned from his narcissist parent is to externalize all the badness. If there's anything wrong going on, if anyone's angry or hurt or feels bad, if any plan fails, it's never the narcissist's fault. It's always going on outside of him. In other words, it's you, not him. Good is always coming from within the narcissist, but bad is always coming from somebody else, always external. And this is a delusion, and it's psychotic. Okay? The traumatizing narcissist is often intelligent, socially adept, and highly functioning, and convinced of his own sanity, and what he's best at is making others feel the same. So for the traumatizing narcissist, maintaining this sense of omnipotent superiority, delusionally believing that one needs nothing that you cannot provide for yourself, this defends against disavowed insufficiency of any type. Since for the traumatizing narcissist, insufficiency is equated with mortifying dependency and impotence and inferiority, he's got to keep that shame off of himself. He's got to keep it external. All right, so those points again. Driven by the need to deny any feeling of shame, the traumatizing narcissist believes in his absolute infallibility and righteousness. He claims to be a source of only good. He locates any and all badness external to himself. This claim is a psychotic delusion. I really want to emphasize that because I don't think we always get that. That's one of the things that might be hard to get. Okay, the next one, externalization of shame, which I've already referred to. Rather than feel self-loathing, the helplessness of unrequited dependency, the traumatizing narcissist arranges with dependency and its accompanying shame to be kept external, assigned only to others. It's got to be out there, not in here. Sheldon Bach, who writes about narcissism, stated that the overinflated narcissist can experience himself as cohesive and alive only at the expense of devitalizing others. And to achieve the goal of devitalization, the traumatizing narcissist virtually colonizes others, using the other as a host to project and control his unwanted and disavowed feelings of dependency, and especially the shame of neediness and inferiority. Because feeling ashamed is so toxic, he controls shame by externalizing it, shaming others. With shame safely being held by those he can control, he stabilizes himself and averts the possibility of his own re-traumatization, humiliation, and mortification. When Sherpa Asahara is put on trial for releasing nerve gas into the Japanese subway system, this guy who had controlled this large group of highly trained scientists in Tokyo, put on trial, having to face the public, he was so humiliated that he literally decompensated into florid schizophrenia. Right, and last. Okay, this whole slide is on this one. The last one, suppression of the subjectivity of the other. Don't read that text. Okay. The traumatizing narcissist child is unfortunately an optimal target for the reception of these projections. So I'm talking about this developmentally now, but you can also think about it as the cult leader and follower. A traumatizing narcissist parent sees only her own needs as valid and characterizes the child who tries to express her needs as needy, selfish, and dependent. How many people have you talked to who say, oh, I'm such a needy, selfish child? And you have to tell them, the number of people who talk about trying to help people have compassion for themselves. Well, if they've been brought up to feel needy and selfish, I'll sometimes say, well, Yeah, you were a child. Were you supposed to not have needs? Were you supposed to not, have a self? At the same time, the traumatizing narcissist parent cannot bear the possibility of being surpassed and not needed by the child. So they have to undermine the child's efforts towards independence. And this is true of the cult leader as well. So it's a double bind. You're unable to be anything but dependent, but you're also trying to be independent. And the child of the traumatizing narcissist is condemned either way. So dependency is associated with shame and humiliation. And independence is associated with rejection and abandonment. If I'm dependent, I should feel ashamed of myself. If I'm independent, you abandon me. Unless you can adopt this counter-dependent, shameless stance of the traumatizing narcissist, this child lives in a post-traumatic state in which your sense of inescapable badness is cemented. Now, what I want to say is that I believe this is the state many of us see people who leave cults coming into therapy in just this state. I failed, my cult leader kicked me out, or I left. I certainly felt both outraged, but also a deep sense of shame and failure when I left the city over. One of the things, though, that happens in this developmental situation is that the traumatizing narcissist takes over the definition of who the child is. So the child doesn't grow up to define herself. She's been defined as needy and therefore shameful, and she learns that she has no value as a person. She's only valued to the extent that she's agreeable to the narcissist. She doesn't know herself as a subject, a me. She knows herself as the object of the other. She's the object of the other person's requirements, judgments, needs, demands, expectations. Just like she had grown up in a cult. Now, that's the last slide. I won't read it, you can look at it, okay? And, okay.
Can you go back to the previous slide for
Yeah.
a sec? I want
Yeah.
to take some notes.
I'll leave this one out a little longer and go back to the next one.
All right, I'm good, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, now this one. Okay, so, a little longer. It's in my book.
Which is available on Amazon.
Sold by ICSA. All right, so to put all this in the simplest possible terms, the developing child of the traumatizing narcissist takes one of two possible paths for survival in the face of being raised by the traumatizing narcissist. Externalization of shameful dependency through the subjugation of others, becoming a cult leader or a traumatizing narcissist parent, or internalization of the badness that the traumatizing narcissist parent has projected. Number one becomes like his traumatizer, and number two becomes a post-traumatic, objectified, and self-objectifying person who repetitively finds himself in relationships in which he's being subjugated. And that's the relational system from a developmental perspective. And what I want to be clear is that I'm not saying that people who get into cults have always grown up in that developmental system, because I don't believe that's true. And I have seen for a fact that it isn't true. But I want to be clear that there is such a developmental system, and it gets replicated in cults. And if you haven't grown up in it to begin with, when you get into a cult, a replica of that system is generated. And you are literally regressed back into a place of dependency. And that whole system is activated. Okay? So really, for real, don't go away from here saying, oh right, he said everybody who was in a cult had traumatizing narcissist parents. I'm totally not saying that. I had neurotic parents, there was trauma. It was not about narcissism in my family. There were other things going on, but not that. And I know many, many others who would say the same. But this is a problem, I would say, for people who were brought up in cults, who were second generation, because that's the system they grew up in. They grew up in the system of the traumatizing narcissist. So I think that's where it's good to understand the relational system. And of course, if you're working, or if you yourself are trying to figure this out, or you're trying to figure out what happened to your adult child, I think understanding the system can be very helpful. Now, let's see, here's what I want to say. There's a little more from my head. Let's see. Not only do we devolve once we're in a cult to this position of self-subjugation, but some of us become subjugated to others. We have to have the role both of the subjugated and the subjugator. And that's a big issue that I won't go into in detail here, but it's a tremendous one I've heard discussed at other conferences. And but for many, and probably most people recruited into cults, this passing along the subjugation is the result of the traumatic stress they're experiencing under the influence of the leader and the culture of the group. And I want to make that point before I go any further, because one of the issues we're all concerned with when we attempt to understand the problem of cults is blaming the victim. And I don't want to be seen as saying that people who join cults have this pre-existing pathology. My own view is akin to something that was said long ago by a group called the Firesign Theater when they said, "We're all bozos in this bus." Remember that? In other words, show me someone who doesn't have some kind of pre-existing pathology. Everyone has their vulnerabilities, their blind spots, their weaknesses, and I'll say it again, vulnerability plus bad luck to be exposed equals getting recruited into a cult. So, getting back to the psychology of the cult leader, I just wanted to say a little more about the leader's dependency. We're so used to talking about how powerful and harmful these leaders are. You know, the old model was really that they are mesmerizing and that's all there is to it, we just get mesmerized. But as a former cult member, I found it very liberating to identify with the child who stood in the crowd and yelled out, "The Emperor is naked!" Now, Michael Langone told me not to make this boring, and he said having nudity in the PowerPoint. So I hope this works for you, Michael. This is good? Fulfilled that. Check. All right, I learned a long time ago, actually, that new pictures always alive in a lecture, so. Dependency is deeply shameful to the cult leader because he was brought up feeling humiliated and rejected for having normal developmental needs. I think. You know, the question that was raised yesterday, Sharon, if he's a psychopath, did he ever have those feelings? And it's debatable, and it's possible there are people who never experienced any kind of that normal human empathy because they were never given even a minute to do so. But I kind of think that most people would have wanted to be able to depend in a normal way, and if they were shamed for having tried to, they would be manically defending against deprivation and humiliation. And when they grow up, they have to believe that they don't need anybody, they can only trust themselves, and that those who depend on others are weak and contemptible. So the cult leader largely unconsciously compensates for his inability to trust and depend on others, and defends against the shame he feels about dependency by attaining control over the followers. I won't depend on you, I'll control you, and you'll depend on me. So she does it first through seductive promises of unconditional love and acceptance, and then through intimidation, shaming, and belittling, the three I, S, and B, I guess. This serves to induce the loathsome dependency in the follower, and the cult leader contrives to disavow his own dependence. These processes of subjugating others and inducing in others what one loathes and seeks to deny in oneself are extreme forms of manic defense. And in fact, the cult leader doesn't escape dependency. They in fact are depending on followers to worship and adore them, and reflect their narcissistic delusion of perfection the way the mirror does to the evil queen in Snow White, whereas everyone but the little boy who cried naked did to the emperor. One of the ways in which this perversion of dependency is often enacted can be observed when the cult leader claims that because he needs nothing, he's entitled to everything. So cult leaders claiming to be pure and perfect without any need or attachment use manic defenses to rationalize and justify their dependence on extravagant and grandiose trappings like thrones, Rolls Royces, trust funds, followers, and so on. Russell Pruckman was a Swami in City Yoga, whom I knew fairly well. He went by the name of Swami Shankarananda, and he was a Brooklyn guy, very smart, funny, and charming. He got kicked out of City Yoga for seducing too many women, which was ironic since the original guru of City Yoga was a sexual predator, as was the man who was the shadow guru behind Muktananda's predecessor, Guru Mai. That man, whom I'll call George, was the one who kicked Shankarananda out. So Shankarananda picked up, and he opened up shop in Melbourne, Australia, where he did very well for about 20 years, until about 40 women came forward recently and complained to the police about being seduced into secret sexual relationships with them. He's under investigation. Here's what one of his victims wrote. I felt for a while that I needed to share a public statement, not out of hate, but concern for everybody. I'm going to abbreviate this. I would like to express my apology for not speaking sooner, as I may have been able to protect other victims. I feel a great regret over this. I'm aware of the backlash and vilifying that has and most likely will occur for me speaking. When I came to live in the ashram, I was never informed of Tantra in the way of sex, sexual rituals, or anything of the like. Had I known that, there's no way I would have stayed. Not only was I already a victim of rape, but I was just about to go through a second trial at Catholic courts in Melbourne. I came because my father was trying to help me and I was looking for spiritual guidance. As one of Swami Shankarananda's victims, I've had to ask myself some difficult questions. Was I coerced? Yes. Was I manipulated? Yes. Was I scared? Yes. Did I ask for the tantric relationship to stop? Yes, many times. Was I silenced? Yes. Did Swamiji ever listen to what I wanted? No. Did Swamiji care that I had a partner? No. Did Swamiji ever allow me to speak to anyone when I felt I needed help about it and was having panic attacks? No. He told me that wanting to tell the truth was a wrong understanding spiritually and that I had to learn to lie. Did Swamiji care that I was scared? No. He got angry at me, told me I was neurotic, weak, and that I would not attain spiritually speaking. Did Swamiji give me a choice to stop? Well, when I begged him, he stopped temporarily, but started again quite quickly. He also made sure I felt condemned, guilty, and ostracized by saying things like, "You're dead to me. I don't want to speak to you. There's no love between us anymore. This tantric relationship is all I want from you, and you should obey the Guru." I trusted Swamiji at the time. I was extremely devoted and continued to ask him why there had to be a physical element to our relationship that I didn't want. Wasn't my love enough? Yet he remained relentless, never taking no for an answer. There was no denying that I wanted to be close to him. I was told that my relation to him was my path to God. I wanted to feel close to God, but I never signed up or asked him for a tantric sexual relationship. It depended on being able to seduce and control others. It depends on being able to do that. He's justifying his actions by citing tantric spiritual practice. He says he's sorry people were hurt. He had no idea that what he was doing was hurtful. And since it appears there won't be a criminal case against him, since he was not a pedophile, he's busy right now setting up shop all over again. On the other hand, there's Ken Dyers, who ran an Australian cult based largely on Scientology. A 30-year-old woman who lives in New York now, who was raised by her parents in this community. When she was 12, with her parents seemingly unaware, Dyers began requiring her to have sex sessions with him. We would call that rape now. It was already known that this had happened with other girls in the community, but this girl's parents showed no signs of suspicion. And she kept it a secret until she was about 19, with the result that her father believed her and supported her in a lawsuit. Stephen Lynch is here. He was involved in this, he knows about this. Her mother refused to believe her and has never spoken to her since, and in fact testified against her. Before going to trial, unlike the unstoppable Krugman, Ken Dyers shot himself through the head and died instantly. What was the difference between Krugman and Dyers? Ken Dyers was a pedophile. He knew he would not get away with it, and Krugman knew he could, because those women were adults. For the cult leader, the ability to induce total dependence sustains the desperately needed delusion of perfect omnipotent control. So I'm going to just tell this last story and then skip to the end. No, I'm going to skip that story. It's a good one.
Do you want time to ask questions or time to listen to the story? Listen.
All right, I'll tell the story. And then some years ago, Carol Diamond presented to ICSA her own story of involvement in group therapy cult. In this cult, everyone was persuaded that they were addicted to relationships and that their only hope of health was to disconnect from all their attachments to spouses, parents, children, and friends. And this led to heartbreaking ruptures for Carol and many of the others who followed these therapists. So what Carol eventually learned was that the woman who was the more dominating therapist of the two had a tragic history. Her birth had caused her mother's death. And the way I understood this, and of course this is an interpretation, is that this therapist, rather than experience an emotional process that would allow her to work through complex grief, abandonment, loss, grief, guilt, shame, a host of complex feelings that you might have knowing that your own birth had caused your mother's death, this therapist instead devised a program which glorified violently severed attachments, as though violently severing meaningful attachments was the way to health and strength. That twisted way of thinking about attachment solved this therapist's problem. She could dismiss all her disturbing feelings about her own tragic birth experience and live in a fantasy of omnipotent control. But she had to inflict her fantasy on others. This therapist was far too insane to ever recognize how destructive she was, but those who followed her found out soon enough for themselves. Cult leaders succeed in dominating the followers because they've mastered the cruel art of exploiting universal human dependency and attachment need in others. So I think this is going to be a little redundant, so I'm just going to, okay. This is the last bit before I end. There are 6 aspects of cults that cult leaders promote in order to maintain their delusion and perfection and omnipotence. Here we go. Purification of ego. The followers' deficiencies are grouped under the umbrella of the ego, the monkey mind, any of those ideas. And they have to be purified. The leader has to purify this in the followers so the follower can reach their potential. Purification usually means being subjected to various forms of sadistic belittling and humiliation, including in some cases beatings and so on, and sexual abuse. Purity can also be judged by one's willingness to give over most of any money you might have, or willingness to abuse others. George Orwell, of course, described this as double-thinking newspeak. Only perfection is good enough. So your potential is defined in whatever way the leader chooses. But in one form or another, cult leaders are always demanding perfection. And by demanding it, the leader makes it impossible for the follower to fully succeed in anything ever, including devotion. So it's impossible for the follower to avoid the leader's abuse and criticism. The follower's status gets raised when he demonstrates his willingness to act abusively and criminally if need be, in accordance with the principle that whatever end is specified by the leader always justifies any means. There's incessant urgency. The more successful and powerful a particular cult becomes, the greater the risk of public exposure, and therefore the more urgent and hysterical the culture becomes. Anxiety mounting, the leadership of the group becomes more shameless and without boundaries, demanding more and more time, money, and energy of the followers, defining enemies of the group to eventually include anyone not in the group, and becoming increasingly punitive of deviance within the ranks. So violation of boundaries becomes a norm. As followers discover that no effort they make is ever good enough to earn the leader's full recognition, or to make them exempt from the leader's destructive attacks, they become more and more desperate to please the leader, becoming willing to let down their own boundaries and to violate the boundaries of others at the leader's behest. Inner deviance must be eradicated. Ultimately, followers act on belief that only the leader's thoughts and feelings matter and have validity, and the follower must exist only to serve the leader's aims. The follower actively seeks to negate any aspect of his own subjectivity which the leader might disapprove of. And finally, defend the leader no matter what. To most outside observers, the leader's aims are clearly nothing more than self-aggrandizement. But insiders, in spite of little or no evidence on which to base their assertions, cling stubbornly to the belief that the leader is actually pursuing lofty and noble aims. Asked to do anything to enrich the leader, including, in the case of some notorious groups, trafficking themselves. I had said prostituting, I won't say that anymore. Followers obey and find a way to believe that whatever they do is righteous. By remaining loyal to the leader, the followers persuade themselves that their own existence is given meaning and validity by their support of the leader's mission. So a cult can be understood as a variant of the traumatizing narcissist's relational system, in which the leader presents herself as the living embodiment and ultimate master of the principles of her own ideology. This is the conclusion. Throughout history, innumerable groups have proclaimed their superiority and therefore deemed themselves entitled to control and exploit others. From the time of biblical slavery to serfdom, the Crusades, the Inquisitions, American slavery, the Holocaust, apartheid, and beyond. Because my own perspective focuses on the impact of being exposed to and traumatized by those who exercise this kind of domination, control, and exploitation, I've chosen to speak of this narcissism, not as Eric Fromm did. He called it malignant narcissism. Of course it is malignant, but I speak of it as traumatizing. Whether it's in the family, the workplace, the religion, the political party, the nation or coalition of nations, or in any group of any size that some might identify as a cult. The traumatizing narcissist leader's program of seduction and exploitation results in a kind of rape of the personhood, the subjectivity of the other. His relational system consists of transactions consistently organized by the sadomasochistic binary. His best followers are those who masochistically submit to his sadism, but who pass the sadism down the hierarchical chain. His is the only right, the wrong is always ascribed to the other, and the possibility of mutual recognition, genuine relatedness among members or between the leader and the follower is entirely foreclosed. The leader is always above, the follower is always below. For followers, no attachment can ever be as important as one's attachment to the leader. Traumatizing narcissism seems to have been with us since the dawn of humanity. I believe it's the source for all the ways that humans have objectified, enslaved, and dehumanized other humans. And it's why our work here, as people affiliated with ICSA, is worthy, and it's the reason why it's never done. Thank you.
Okay, we have a little bit of time for questions. Anyone have some? Yeah.
Just a simple question. There's a lot of discussion about second generation narcissism. What about first generation? Is there such a thing as a first generation narcissist? And then also, how do you break the cycle? How do you get out of the generational syndrome?
Yeah, I do see it as an intergenerational chain, so kind of chicken or egg problem. Probably not one you can say, oh, it started here. At this point, I don't think we can find the original narcissist. You know, that's maybe a Platonic ideal, or the opposite of a Platonic ideal. And how do you break the cycle? You know, I'd say that people who leave cults and who try to recover or trying to break the cycle, they are standing up against the traumatizing narcissist. And That's one way. When you become a parent, and I know I work with many people who grew up with very narcissistic parents who become beautiful, who become really loving parents, and they break the cycle that way. So any way you can, maybe is the answer.
What I'm seeing, and maybe you can clarify or help me wrap my head around this, but when you're talking about neediness, I'm seeing that my daughter, as the called victim, is projecting this onto me as her mother because she's broken off her relationship with me. One of the reasons is because of my neediness. I'm a needy person. So is that, I'm understanding that. It's coming from him through her to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda. I'll get up and I'll help you out here. No, I think what you're seeing is that her cult leader has made you toxic and has, disavowed his neediness and now calls you the needy one. And, so he gets to scapegoat you and uses her as a pawn, right? And I think that is disgraceful, and I'm so sorry.
Can I do anything?
Well, can you do anything? Of course, it's the question every parent never stops asking. And hopefully you're talking to some of the counselors who counsel you to never give up, but also go on with your own life as best you can. Yeah.
If I just suggest the ladies back, I feel on the breaking the cycle, I feel really strongly like I want to respond that recognizing who that needs yourself is probably a good first step. That's at least for personal experience.
What differentiates the cult leader who is a traumatizing narcissist from one who has an antisocial personality disorder?
This is a question I avoided answering. Well, look, I would say this, that they are on a continuum, and that the antisocial cult leader is also a narcissist, for sure. And that they will blur, almost in every case, they will blur. I didn't see it. So that some of the cult leaders will always be both. Some will be so severe that they may, and some, like Jen Jones, they started out more on the narcissist end and end up on the total sociopath end. So that distinction is tough to be made, but I would suggest that no matter how sociopathic, the narcissism dynamic is there as well. And it's worth understanding and not dismissing, even though the sociopathy is so concrete. And so, you can't do anything with the narcissism, just the way you can't do anything with the sociopathy. It's not that you can treat the severe traumatizing narcissist. In a non-cult situation, say with a family, and say one of the parents is pretty narcissistic, they might be on a spectrum, and they might actually recognize their own destructiveness, and they might want to have remorse and contrition and atonement. So that they would move from being this traumatic narcissist down to being just a narcissistic person without being as traumatizing. But the cult leader has already gone past that point and is always traumatizing. And then perhaps beyond into total decision.
One more question?
One more? Hang on. We're going to go to the other side of the room. Just right there. Oh, sorry. Thanks.
I want to thank you because I was also part of SIDA, another branch of SIDA. And my question comes from, as an American going into Hindu Indian systems, I remember hearing my former teacher say, Nityananda Smaru, Nityananda killed 3 people. But it was okay, it was beautiful, there was reasons for it, blah, blah, blah. And I heard someone sitting next to me whispering, what a grace it would be to be killed by the guru. and so, but my question is, I don't know, I never met, I read, actually edited some of that work that you did for the magazine. Are there any, how can there be any true, is the system all wrong? Because, are there true gurus that people can trust? Or are they, it seems inherently subjugating?
Right. I can't put myself in a subjugating position personally, so that even going to like 5 different Unitarian churches, which you couldn't be more progressive and socially conscious and intellectually progressive and so on, even sitting with these wonderful, smart, lovely Unitarian ministers, sitting below as a member of the congregation with them on the dais, talking in their rational, intelligent, secular, humanist, beautiful way, I still feel like I'm being subjugated. So it's my post-traumatic stress, right? Other people can and do feel very comfortable to go on meditating, to go on chanting, to go on hearing teachers talk about spiritual practices. And if that is not traumatizing or triggering, then if you are pretty well convinced that you've got an ethical group that has not violated ethical boundaries, then by all means pursue what is meaningful and true and real for you. But just know yourself, know your limits, know what your needs are.
It doesn't mean it's a whole system, but not.
I can't speak for that. That is not, I am not entitled or ordained, whatever the word is, to say, you know, it's a personal choice that has to be made on a personal basis. So thank you.
So this is the end of the session, but before we end, I want to encourage everyone to come tonight at 8:30 to hear Diana Bram do a one-woman show on her experience with her cult leader and her cult. It's in a very engaging, humorous way. It's called So Amazing, and I think you'll be amazed by it. So please come, and thank you, Dan, for an incredible morning.
Thank you.
If you can read a damn book, what the hell you need a nigga to tell you some shit for? Because we lazy. We lazy. And we want to follow some damn body. I wouldn't follow nobody to the fucking bathroom. But we are addicted to this thing. And you follow these niggas for 10, 20 years and you look up and you find out they ain't shit, but you can't get out because you're all socialized in it. You done put up all your money. You done talk shit to all your friends on how they fucked up. And they little shit they doing ain't no good. And so you can't get out now. So you stay on and on and on with all these old bullshit ass leaders. I don't follow nobody. If I don't follow the white man, you know I ain't gonna follow his invention. A nigger was a bad invention. Niggers and flies. One spread filth and one spread lies. The more I hang around niggers, the more I like flies. Y'all crazy as hell following somebody.